So this topic is extremely broad. When I was thinking about this subject matter, I was trying to figure out where exactly do we get started. And so that's why we have these guys here. So let's try to figure out who these guys are and jump into it. So do you guys want to introduce each of yourselves, maybe starting, Ed, with you?
Sure. My name's Ed Maguire. I'm a software analyst. I cover technology and innovation as well for CLSA, which is a brokerage firm. We don't do investment banking. We don't do dark pools trading. We do intellectually honest research, and I focus a lot on a lot of different emerging technologies, but Internet of Things is currently the area that we're most focused on right now.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Matt?
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Turck. I'm a partner at FirstMark Capital, which is a great VC firm here in New York. That's, I guess, most well known for investments in Pinterest and Shopify and things like that. I'm the newish partner there. I've been there for a year and a half, and I focus on a bunch of things, but specifically on big data and on the Internet of Things as well, two separate but related fields. I run a couple of large meetups that cover those areas. So it's kind of funny. It's actually a bunch of people lots of familiar faces. But there's one that's called Data Driven NYC that covers big data, and another one that's called Hardwired NYC that covers the Internet of Things. And in my 18 months at FirstMark, I've made 3 investments in the Internet of Things. So maybe we can talk about that later, but I'm active mostly as an investor.
Thanks, Matt. Tom?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Touchet. I'm the CEO of City 24/7. I will run through I'll give you the quick version of the resume and why I'm here. First, I love talking IoT. It's like my second favorite topic behind my son, who's 1, and Patrick knows already very well that is my most favorite topic to talk about. But that said, I love IoT. I'm on the steering committee for the IoT World Forum. And specifically, I'm helping guide the smart cities conversations and the transportation conversations. Our company, City 24/7, I'm the CEO. I've been now there for about 6 years. We essentially help cities become a little bit smarter, communicate a little bit cleaner, easier with their citizens, help citizens to communicate more easily with their city. And hopefully, we say, the internet gave everybody a voice. The Internet of Things is going to help create a conversation between the citizens and the city as you traverse it. So you're going to walk through, you're going to be giving sensor data, you're going to be getting sensor data, and you're fundamentally going to be interacting in a way that's transformational. Prior to my time at City 24/7, and we're seeing some nice traction now after some years building up to this point, I was the executive producer at the Today Show. And before that at ABC's Good Morning America. So I'm a traditional media guy who's now become an IoT guy.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ugeux. I head global strategy for Clear Channel Outdoor, which is a large outdoor advertising company. My true one obsession is my 1-year-old son. So I'll take Tom any day. The reason why the Internet of Things is very relevant to us is 2 things. First of all, if you think of a billboard or a piece of street furniture like a bus shelter, any one of them is a potential device connected to the Internet of Things. And when you have 750,000 of them in very highly trafficked locations, it becomes a pretty interesting proposition. And it's a particularly important proposition because we are very linked to the future of cities. And when you have 60 million people moving into cities every single year around the world, that is very much a key driver of our business. And so I'm looking to see how we can work better with cities around the world, and we're in about 30 countries at this stage, to develop solutions for anything from sensors to small cells to advertising that connects to Internet of Things. So very much becoming an important part of our business model.
Great. So before I was practicing as an attorney, I was an engineer. And as an engineer, what we had to do, what I always wanted to do, was very specifically define exactly what I was trying to do and my issue. So in this context, I think it would be great to try to get some kind of a definition of what we're talking about. So I think the term Internet of Things has been thrown around for a long time now. I think it's just become everything to everybody. So I wonder if we can maybe start by thinking about really what we're talking about. And maybe Ed, you can start by just kind of giving us your thoughts around what are we talking about when we raise this term? How do we break this down? How do we organize our thoughts around this?
Sure. So the Internet of Things actually refers to it's very broad. The idea that all devices physical device, we're connecting the physical world to information technology, and there's a consumer aspect to this. There's an industry aspect to it. I mean, from my standpoint, what I look at what's important about the idea that we're able to get data from all sorts of activities and actions in the world that we've never been able to quantify before. That data somehow gets transferred or sent to a software system where there may be some sort of analytics and some action that's taken afterwards, either to optimize or to create a service business. As we look at the business, it really does touch every industry. And what's driving this is that there are economies of scale and network effects at play when the cost of compute storage gets extremely cheap. The cost of bandwidth gets really cheap. It's we're wiring up the world now, and essentially, if anybody's read Kevin Kelly's book, What Technology Wants, we're actually seeing sort of the wiring of the world almost as a biological system. And as this evolves, this is giving rise to an enormous amount of different use cases, visibility into the world, and certainly some transformative processes.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? How do we break down this category? How do you think, when you think about the Internet of Things, how are you kind of thinking, organizing your thoughts around it?
So of course, what's tricky is that it's not the internet, or not just the internet, and it's not things or just things, right? So when you look at the connectivity that enables all of this, a lot of this is done through M2M protocols that for the most part have nothing to do with the internet, whether that's Zigbee, BLE, any of those things, and perhaps more importantly, it's not things, it's babies, 1-year-old kids or 4-year-old kids at the mall with smartwatches. It's planes, it's livestock, it's just about anything. So hence the confusion, but I guess it's a cool, nice little buzz term. But I, like all of us here, but me personally, as a VC, I think that the Internet of Things has a real opportunity to become Internet 3.0. So if you think of Internet 1.0 being the creation of the network, so connecting machines to computers and creating the network, and that gave the rise to huge companies like Google, Amazon. Then the Internet 2.0 was connecting people to people through the network, and that gave rise to Facebook, Uber to some extent. This has a potential, and it's the jury is absolutely still out as to whether that's going to happen or not. But that has the potential to become Internet 3.0, where you basically connect everything else through the network, which is why everybody's going bananas for the opportunity. Mm-hmm. But there's a long road ahead.
Any other thoughts on that, guys? Yeah.
I would just say, I think that we are still early in the hockey stick of the growth of this, and it's an exciting time to be exploring. But that said, just the transformation from last year to this year. Last year at the World Forum, essentially all they were talking about is protocols, and it was the companies that you might expect, the Qualcomms, the Ciscos, the IBMs, who were driving most of those conversations between Barcelona, which was last October, which was the first, the inaugural event, and planning for this coming one, which is going to be in Chicago in October. The conversation has turned from these broad discussions about how we're going to build this to applications. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how it actually interacts and changes people's lives, whether you're at home with your Nest or whether you're in a connected car now where Audi or BMW and everybody else is going to have, your Wi-Fi and your app, and they're going to become media channels themselves. So it's all about now the personal impact. And I think that's where we're going to see really the most exciting growth.
Mm-hmm. Great. Patrick? No? Okay. Let me take an administrative pause. One thing I wanted to actually ask you, and I forgot to, is if we can get kind of a show of hands of who we have here so that the panel kind of knows who we're talking to. So are we entrepreneurs, founders, essentially? Is that who we are? Okay. How about investors? Seed, VC, other? Okay. Okay, great. just to get a sense. So what I'm going to try to do is, get through maybe one of the bigger topics and then give a pause for the audience to also ask questions. So why don't we take a pause right now, actually, and see if there's any immediate questions from the group. Anyone on this topic? Yes, please.
Is there like a way to tailor like where to actually tailor like upon like the investment rather than certain industry, or is just
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Did you guys hear that?
She wondered where you could tailor invest in certain industries.
Where we can invest. Okay, we'll cover investment in
the
a.
panel has like different
Yeah, so we'll get to investment. That's one of the categories I was going to hit. How about any questions on this topic around just the definition and organization of the idea? Okay. Yeah.
I'd like to know if you're viewing the global markets, so say China, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Middle East, as strong emerging markets comparable to the excitement in the U.S. for these emerging markets.
It's a good question. How do we look at this worldwide, maybe, as opposed to just the U.S.? Yes?
As I mentioned, we're in 30 countries. China has not been a huge hotbed in our industry for this particular type of innovation. Singapore's done very well in terms of integrating some of our digital properties with Internet of Things type propositions. We very much look at this, and I can talk later about some specific examples around the world, but we're very much looking at this internationally as well. In fact, some of our more innovative campaigns and more innovative work in this particular space has been internationally. And the reason for that is very specific to our sector. And that is that in the US, we tend to work with private landlords, whereas internationally, we work with municipalities. And so when you start working with municipalities and you think about things like environment, traffic, just any topic that they would be interested in, even education, this kind of topic starts to come up. So let's say we have 20,000 bus shelters across a particular country or a particular city. That asset base becomes very helpful to them in checking traffic, telling their citizens certain things, etc. So it's very much a global topic.
Mm-hmm.
I would just want to add that the EU has been at the forefront of establishing some initiatives to drive standards bodies, and we've also seen China as well make some investments. So we're seeing more, I would say, sort of public sector advancements here in the U.S. The Internet of Things has been on some of the longer term plans, but we haven't seen that really driving initiatives so far.
Oh, yeah. So I think that kind of takes us into actually my next topic, which is around, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, which is around the drivers to this, right? I mean, we're talking a lot about this ecosystem, but what's been driving it? And I think we've said a little bit about it, but some of the things that come up often are, just the mass expansion of sensors out there, the fact that wireless standards are evolving quickly, this incredible explosion of data. So in terms of these trends, I mean, what does the panel think about kind of the speed with which these things are going to continue, or, what can we say about these drivers that would help inform some of the decisions that people are trying to make around their companies right now?
All right, I'll start. So I think there's been a perfect storm of conditions that have aligned very quickly to enable all of this to happen. So you mentioned some of them. I'll just add to the fairly long list the absolute ubiquity of mobile phones. The now cliche expression is that the mobile phone has become the remote control for the Internet of Things, but like supercomputer in our pocket, choose your cliche. But absolutely that's helped tremendously. The rise of crowdfunding, and I guess we're going to be talking about this later, but has been very important from our perspective as investors. Is to a large extent is sort of single-handedly revived hardware as an investment category. But I guess we'll talk about crowdfunding later. But that's been a factor as well. The independent but simultaneous rise of cloud computing and big data technology has been hugely important. So maybe we'll cover that later. But as Ed was starting to allude to, it's all about the data. It's all about the software. No investor wants to invest in pure hardware. What excites people is the data potential. And all of this is possible because you have this cheap, available, infinitely scalable cloud infrastructure. And because you have open source, cheap, very powerful big data tools that have appeared. So that's yet another factor. The rise of 3D printing, which again, completely independent, but happen at the same time, enables people to create prototypes of connected devices very quickly, and so on and so forth. So it's like almost this weird occurrence of like all those things that have aligned at the same time to make this possible. Because as we all know, it's not a completely new concept, but it's happening now very fast because everything is ready.
And I would just add that all those things we've felt. I mean, we were early to the point where those startups out there who were also early, you learn in those periods and you have some scars sometimes. Being a pioneer is not always the most fun part, because when you're putting together a lot of different aspects, and IoT touches on a lot of different aspects, most of which you just ran through, you sometimes have to wait for the wind with the market. But the market is the last piece, and it is now there. And I mean, I think that there are now, we're seeing, I think the latest figure is $4.6 trillion over the next 10 years in public sector spending. Because the municipalities realize the value of deploying these low-cost sensors, of learning about their actual environment, taking that data, turning it in, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, changes a lot in their ecosystem. And so we're actually seeing the dollars being spent, and that's the last most important piece to really move all of this along.
That's a great point. Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of softer drivers potentially. We've talked a lot about tech. I would cluster them in two groups. One would be obsession and the other one would be collaboration. On the obsession side, I think things like the obsession with the self and, wanting to track everything that one does is something that's staggering. I mean, if you think of the amount of money that's spent on personal fitness device, personal health device, and all that stuff. That's a big part of the growth of our civilization, really, for the past 30 years, and something that's helping this. Also, the obsession within companies for efficiency and optimization. We talk a lot about the Internet of Things and we think of Nest, right? But think about it in terms of optimizing company processes or something that's very big and run by a company as opposed to for an individual. So that's all about obsession. I guess one last category, which is very dear to my heart being in advertising, is the obsession with tracking. It's basically the obsession with the self, but applied to the advertising industry. So basically, it doesn't matter if it actually works or not, as long as you can track it, they'll buy it. Then on the collaboration front, and I think this is an important thing about the Internet of Things and what it not only enables, but also requires is an increased, comfort over the past 30 years with collaboration in business. So if you think about the IBM of the 1970s, it does everything itself, right? From hardware to software. Whereas now we're working with large companies, setting up platforms with smaller companies, creating middleware, all the way to the sort of very small app developer. And I think the Internet of Things is not possible without that kind of ecosystem. Similarly, in terms of the social layers and the willingness for human beings to collaborate between themselves or communicate between themselves, there's a lot of things in the software that Nike Plus will provide me, which I don't use because it's all about telling my friends how fit I am or unfit I am. So I think these soft things should not be undermined, because if you look after 20 years and you think of all the big hypes, they were all perfect because the perfect storm was there on technology, and you realize the adoption just wasn't going to be there. And I think a thing we should probably come back to.
Just on the obsession front, like, I don't know to which extent everybody follows it. Have you guys seen the Selfie drone? The Exo thing, which like follows you on your cell phone, so that you can have an air view of whatever you're doing at any time. It's fantastic. It's on Kickstarter, I think.
Actually, coming back to your point about drivers, Harold, one of the interesting aspects of the Internet of Things is that it enables this whole idea of platform economics. You can turn a lot of things into a platform, and the idea of a platform is it's a technology or a set of technologies or a set of relationships that allows people to innovate, and that's why this is it's such a great opportunity for startups. So if you start thinking about what was the automobile like 25 years ago, well, Ford made everything that was in that automobile, but as soon as an automobile becomes connected trusted and has open APIs, when you have cloud services, all of a sudden you have, startups that can pop up. I mean, Pandora's business is growing because now they're able to connect to automobiles. The home is becoming a platform for innovation. And Nest is a perfect example of this, where Google had just made an announcement. They're opening up, they've opened up their APIs. They've got a new, standards initiative. I believe it's Threads is the name, but, this creates a lot of opportunity for, entrepreneurs to solve problems. And I think the more important, trend that we're tracking is that we're really seeing that all of these technologies together are enabling businesses to transform themselves. And it's not just from the standpoint of being able to create new businesses, a brand new startup, tracking devices on you and vibrating to tell you, hey, take the stairs, don't be lazy. But businesses that have been selling stuff, Train sells air conditioners, and now they outfit them all with sensors, and 50% of their business now comes from services where they can actually track how their customers are using things. They can tell when things are about to break down. They can create new business models. And this is really what's got so many people excited, particularly industries that have not been touched by a lot of IT. I mean, a lot of internet businesses are just organically built out of, a bunch of coders working on Amazon Web Services. But if you think about some of the old line businesses and physical businesses that haven't been instrumented yet, this is the big opportunity, and people are now kind of waking up to, the possibilities here, because you have all of the elements as the other panelists have outlined.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Okay. Any questions on drivers before we jump on? Yes.
Just on Ed, for what you were talking about, and you mentioned a little bit about the platforms all competing in the home. So you mentioned Google and Apple, and you could say quirky with what they're doing with Wink. And is this a system where all these competing operating systems and standards eventually mesh together, or do you see there ultimately being a winner who kind of grabs the market, like we've seen in search and traditional operating systems?
Yeah, I mean,
the question is, what's going to happen in the platform war in the home, I guess. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's too early to call a winner at this point. But I'd say what's different about what we define as the Internet of Things is we don't necessarily deal with, say, a monolithic market. I mean, smartphones are all little boxes with screens, right? A PC is it's a CPU and a hard drive and a display. Those tend to have led themselves to platforms winning. Certain internet businesses lead themselves to almost these de facto monopolies. But what's interesting about the protocol wars that are going on right now is that you have lots of different use cases. You've got in the home you might use Zigbee or different types of mesh networks. You have industrial use cases which might use different protocols. You have IP. There's going to be a lot of different. There's certainly no one size fits all. There may be in certain verticals, I think, platforms that emerge as winners, but it's hard to envision, kind of a big monster, gobbling up the opportunity and forcing everybody to write to them.
Just quickly, I think it's an all-out war that just started, right? So Apple's platforms are not going to work with iOS. Microsoft has joined the All Join Alliance. Google has opened their platform, and now, SmartThings. SmartThings is I don't know if you guys are familiar with SmartThings. It's a very promising sort of home platform, automation platform that raised plenty of money and had to sell just now for $200 million, which for a company of that level of promise is a little bit of a sort of lukewarm outcome. But they had to sell. So because the last remaining buyer was Samsung, and Samsung, came in and they had to sell. So I think it's just the beginning. And I don't know that it's really necessarily very good news for the Internet of Things as a category. But they're gonna, just the way they've been forcing us to choose between search engine X or search engine Y or browser X, browser Y, you'll have to choose your home system.
Any other thoughts on that? No. Okay. Yes, please.
In terms of the government security initiatives in the U.S., with our emails being collected by our national national security agencies. This obviously impacts privacy issues and big data and data collection by Internet of Things companies. So are you finding that you work with law firms such as Orrick in terms of privacy and security of data and how to mediate these issues in terms of government requesting this data and how you deal with your clients and consumers? It's a very important area.
Yeah.
Security, dealing with government regulatory issues.
Yeah,
Not regulatory,
or
we're talking about
privacy.
security, where the government is collecting all of our emails and all of our telephone calls in the U.S. This is not just security, that's a different issue. We're talking about the government having access to every piece of information.
Right. So in terms of privacy, we're not directly involved in such concerns, even though whenever we think about launching a mobile-enabled experience, we do take very good care in actually thinking about this. I will say the one thing that has been absolutely staggering to me is how little concern there has been about privacy, in particular in this country. Again, going to your question earlier about the global nature of things, the approach to privacy is very different around the world. In Europe, for example, it's a much bigger deal than it is here, which, to your point, is quite a surprise. We, as a company, care very deeply about that, but I am not seeing an emerging voice. And in fact, I'm seeing some very successful PR campaigns against privacy. So if you look at the right to forget oneself in Europe and the utter failure that has been by an incredibly clever campaign led by the likes of Google, I'm not seeing this problem being resolved anytime soon. I think the governments will start dealing with the governance first, and the NSA would be more concerned with what Mrs. Merkel thinks than what the average consumer does, because the average consumer is not organized to tell the governments they actually care.
Yeah, we find with our company and with my interaction with some of the other larger retail brands that are now interacting in the forum that really it's coming down to consumers. If you give them value, they'll trade the privacy. So not all, but by and large, if you give somebody something that saves them a couple bucks or a couple dollars or a couple minutes, they will trade their privacy for that ability to transact.
Mm-hmm. In a simple one-off opt-in too.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we've set some of the background. Now, there are lots of verticals that often get mentioned when we talk about this subject, obviously. Public infrastructure, energy, automotive, the connected home, healthcare, cities, retail, banking, parking, etc. Which verticals are most interesting to the panel? And maybe, Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about just the city and where do you see that, in the future?
Sure. I'll firmly say cities, although there's a number of different areas that fold into that. I think the most interesting driver that I think maybe some of you know, but people are more and more living in cities, and that trend is a hockey stick even steeper than the IoT. I mean, for the first time in history, more people live in cities, and this is only a couple of years ago, more people now live in cities than in the countryside. That's never in the history of our Earth been that way. And that it is literally an X. And that population, people are coming here more and more and more. And you think about it in terms of what the cities need, that's a lot of stress, and it's a lot of services that they have to more efficiently provide. So you can see why, of all the IoT pieces that are emerging, if you can make a city a little more efficient, if you can help them get information out a little bit cleaner, a little bit faster, that ripple effect is transformational. So they need the help. They want the help. They'll pay for the help. And that's where the last piece is. I think there are now some nice monetization pieces that you can put together for a city around all of these IoT things, especially if you have a connectivity bed that you can build them off of. So I think from a city's perspective, IoT makes all the sense in the world and will only grow as it progresses as a market.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts around that? Yeah.
Yeah, the risk of being controversial, because what's a panel without being controversial? I actually like anything that's a big process that involves a lot of people and that is linked to a big pool of money with few decision makers. Now, that's pretty obvious, right? Except that Nest fits none of these. It's one person, right? So if you customize for one person, you think of just basic data science, right? The variability in one person is much higher. If I think about my consumption as my AC, it depends on whether my wife's there, whether my kid's there, whether I'm in a good mood or bad mood, whether I'm watching TV, whether there's a device going on, etc. Like tracking and putting sort of an algorithm around that would be really messy. Then I think about traffic in the Holland Tunnel at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. And I think that's pretty predictable, and data science could do a very, very good job with that, which leads to, a good use of sensors, a good optimization, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm much more bullish, looking at things like cities, and obviously I've laid my cards on the table on that one, but also things like defense, process optimization within the organization, the enterprise side of things. And those kinds of things, which is kind of maybe not obvious, but, would love to get a pushback from the panel.
Anyone?
I disagree. Actually, I don't. I'm sorry. No, so as an investor, I see opportunities across the board. So to this point, that actually happens to be where I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities. All the verticals that you mentioned are all sort of industrial type, Internet of Things opportunities, and that's what I think ultimately where most of the money is. The really geeky, obscure stuff that's not sexy, that's not gonna get you on TechCrunch. But, whether that's healthcare or smart cities or, insurance related stuff, I think there's a whole world of opportunities like, factory optimization, with the obvious caveat that, there's going to be, all of this is going to need to be infinitely, more rugged, stronger, sturdier than it currently is, right? I mean, it's kind of cute to be connecting your, your air conditioning to, the Internet of Things or the Internet. It's not as cute when you're trying to connect a plane, right? Or a, absolutely mission critical machine where, there's, people's lives at stake. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the, Internet of Things. So from an investor standpoint, that those are long-term opportunities. You invest now and you think that those companies are going to be building over the next sort of 10 years or so. On the consumer side, so I'll tell you what I don't like. So, right now, so I don't like home automation. Because as per the earlier discussion, I think that category is pretty much killed. All the large players have moved. So first of all, a lot of large players were already there. So if you think of the Comcast and all those guys, but now on top of that, Google and everybody else is coming in. So for now, I think it's sort of game over. I don't like wearables because Ed is wearing two excellent products here. At CES last year, it felt like there were more wearables vendors than wrists available. So that's too much. But at the same time, I think there's an opportunity, I think the Internet of Things is one of these interesting sort of changes in paradigm where certainly, you have a pretty historical chance of reinventing entire product categories, especially very mundane stuff. So Nest is a good example. Like, what could be more boring than a thermostat? But if you think of, baby monitors, kitchen accessories, what have you, that's, a once in a lifetime chance to just like reinvent those products. And I think there's going to be a window of about a couple of years where, people are going to have the opportunity to create quite literally the new household brands, and I think that window is going to close after that because there'll be too many people in the market. But I think that's interesting as well. So from industrial to all this is interesting. And just very quickly, last thing, I'm a big believer in all the enabling technologies for the Internet of Things, so infrastructure, analytics, which is getting becoming a very hot area, security, developer tool, and all the things.
Yeah, I would have to not disagree with the verticals. I mean, medical is actually very exciting. I mean, there have been some amazing stories about some right now. They're thinking of them as big data stories, but using, Santa Clara Hospital, for instance, put RFID tags on all of their patients, tracked basically from intake to discharge, which waiting rooms they were in, and looked at all of the processes and was able to optimize the entire workflow of a patient going through a hospital and was able to save, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, when you combine that with things like swallowables that can, you could swallow something to track and, track you, there's some pretty amazing stuff, particularly, public safety. But one of the points that keeps on jumping out that's really profound is that, right now people are looking at these business opportunities of cost efficiencies and efficiency gains. So one of the problems that when you're trying to size a business opportunity, like investors, they like a TAM, a total addressable market. Public investors, they don't want to invest in something unless there's a TAM. Startups, you guys are cool. You make your TAM, right? But when you look at how Cisco and GE are trying to size the market, they're saying, oh, well, there's economic value add. And, Cisco and GE says, okay, well, if you do all these things, you can save 1% on your fuel cost over 20 years. And that's going to be, $200 trillion, the Dr. Evil thing. And that goes back to some of the ROI arguments when you're actually trying to make a business case. It's nice to save money. It's sort of like knowledge management in the late 90s where you say, oh, I save 30 minutes a week by not having to look for stuff. But what's jumping out, what's really interesting is how you're able to change buying and selling stuff to relationships. And this is, when you think about companies like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and all these companies that rely on your sensor, which is you as a person, and don't forget that people are also things in a way. They happen to be organic, but they walk around with smartphones and they've got GPS. And the idea that you can create these businesses that are very they're not asset intensive. BMW is going into a zip car type of business right now where they can track all of their assets and essentially maximize, what used to be buying and selling cars, and you would have to maintain that. We're moving to an economy where it's very easy to just rent stuff. And all of these technologies are allowing businesses really in every vertical, in medical and heavy equipment, particular, automobiles, hotels, transportation. I mean, these all become services, and you end up thinking about subscriptions, and that's pretty profound. It'll take a while for us to get there, but that's what I'm excited about.
Great. Questions on these verticals? Yes. Oh, right there. In the back, right there. Yeah.
And you talked about people buying this renting thing. How real is that in the rest of the world, where they still want to buy things as opposed to the internet, Facebook, what is the reality out there?
Well, a lot of times, what happens, for instance, is in developing markets is there's a lot more innovation just out of necessity, right? We have the good fortune of having ubiquitous bandwidth and cheap and smartphones that a lot of people are relying on. So, if you want to get cynical to your point, right? These are just, Airbnb or Zipcar is just for rich people that live in the first world that have smartphones. The reality is, that over time, the cost of sensors gets cheap. So if you're a manufacturer, it may actually be too expensive for you to buy. We rent all kinds of things, but certainly over time, I would expect there are enough creative people who can take advantage of cloud computing and analytics. You don't have to buy a big bunch of servers and data geeks to run analytics. The connectivity is cheap, and certainly, in the developing world, wireless connectivity is way, way ahead of the developed world in many areas. So, I just expect a lot of innovations to come organically out of all of these drivers. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Sure.
Not wanting to talk to the rent versus buy point, which is really a first world problem if you think about it, right? It's you basically trying to shrink your costs when you're consuming too much. That's almost the definition of a first world problem. I think what you see, and we mentioned mobile, is not so much that the infrastructure is better, is that the solutions are more creative. So if you think of mobile payments in the developing world, it's phenomenal, and they're doing it with feature phones. So it goes back to the point I was making about think about the human factors just as much as you think of the technology, and you'll come up with the thing that will actually stick. And whenever we go to emerging markets, in this job or in previous jobs. It's always something that I think is well worth remembering.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a question?
This relates to something you were saying. My question is that with everything getting tagged with these sensors, do we end up creating enormous value by ending decisions made on so-called summary statistics? Because we can now individualize and customize for each and every individual who you're targeting them now. And so no longer mean medians are important. I can just look at one individual and customize services, whether it's creating a drug or it's, sending in content or even advertising, just based upon that individual's profile.
You're going to love this answer. It depends. The fact is, there's some things that will be highly customizable, right? The swallow ball, I bloody well hope it's customized to me, because otherwise I might get a massive rejection and keel over. But think about my business, right? I'm in outdoor advertising, so I have billboards that hundreds of people see every day. And everybody's watched Minority Report and says, so is that really happening? Is this happening? It's like, well, think about it. If I'm Coke, and I've just done, and they have just done this, a major campaign to customize their billboard. And I want to do this in an automated way, so not relying on what they've actually done, which is social media or a tablet or what have you. But actually do it using a sensor, call it a beacon, on the side of the road. Who am I customizing for when I've got 250 people crossing my sign within any single minute? And that's when they're driving very slowly. You can't, right? So you're going to have some situations where you're actually dealing with the flow, and you're customizing for the prevalent variable within that flow. And, that's where data analytics comes in. So who am I actually targeting? Is it, in my business, a woman who likes to play tennis, who comes from this zip code? Or is it the individual? And in my business, it's definitely going to be the group. But in other businesses, it's going to be very highly customization. So unfortunately, it depends.
Okay. And yet, not to disagree with anything Patrick said, the disruption is also coming to that world in a very profound way, because every single car that Audi and BMW push out by 2017, and most other car companies also, are going to be Wi-Fi enabled, and they're going to be targeting you with advertisings. So you may or may not be interacting with that sign in a different way, but you're getting targeted ads in your experience as you drive already, and that's going to be,
Is it my car or is it Tom's car?
No, that's
Matt's car in terms of this number of things. So unless I'm actually linking back to a single car, which is the example that Tom takes, and loving a bit of controversy, I'd love to see the government's position on distraction for coming with mobile advertising or in the car, because we can't even put video in our billboards in this country because people's.
Who would argue you're not driving that car in a couple of years anyway?
There you go.
For a self-driving car.
Another wonderful Internet of Things innovation.
That's right. Okay. So Ed, maybe you could ask or help us with, given this landscape, given all of these drivers, what are the different business models that may be evolving as a result of this? Is there anything you can say to that?
Well, sure. And I've touched on this quite a bit before, but, and I was actually going to address your question, which is, manufacturing is changing. We go from a mass production to mass. People have been talking about mass customization or personalized medicine for a very, very long time. And these, of course, are internet enabled, and they're not necessarily Internet of Things enabled. But when you talk about, digitizing everything that you like, actually, Tom recommended a fantastic book to me by Jeremy Rifkin called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. And I highly recommend it to everybody. It talks about the rise of the Internet of Things, cheap solar energy, and the disruptive role that open source software plays in the business model. I mean, what happens is as we were talking about moving from selling things, buying and selling physical assets, to selling services. You want a transportation service. You want I want a home decoration service because I like birds. I want to put a bird on it. If anybody gets that reference anyway, put a bird on everything in my house. It can be, 15 years from now, you can have 3D print everything, and everything is digital. So when you go from one place to another, if you don't want to spend the moving costs, you can just recycle everything that's in your place and use that, redecorate your space. I mean, there's actually a company called Do It Right This Time, which is doing the same thing with building office space. It's complete. It's less resource intensive. Design is much more important these days because you're not talking about mass production anymore. Those constraints are behind us. And then these service business models where you actually build a relationship, have a very different create a very different dynamic between vendors who are building business and their customers, because their customers, if you have a recurring relationship, you can your switching costs are low. John Hagel and John Seeley Brown talked a lot about this in The Power of Pull, which sort of lays the foundation for a lot of this these connected business models that come together in a modular basis. But everything is a service. Stuff is open source. It's much more resource intensive, and don't throw away that art history degree because it actually might come in pretty handy.
Any thoughts? Yep.
On business models?
Yes.
So it does change quite a bit of things. I mean, the ability to put on sensors on a bunch of different products does change a bunch of things around precisely the conversation we were having earlier about services, service model versus an ownership model. So Rolls-Royce, for example, has been experimenting with a business model where they would charge airlines based on consumption. So for their jet engines. So now you don't buy a jet engine anymore. You rent it, and you can now rent it because you have sensors on it that can communicate in real time, how much, people actually use them. So that type of thing is super interesting. It's just the beginning. So we'll see how that evolves. At a startup level in my world, business models for Internet of Things startups has been a real, not really an issue, but it's been an unknown. So all of us, entrepreneurs and VCs, we're all thinking, okay, well, I guess we can make money with hardware sales. So that's nice, to some extent, if you actually get the product out. And that gets you some margin, but then, what else? How do you get to, something that can grow explosively? So everybody says, okay, well, we're going to sell the data. So that's great. But first of all, to have data, you need to have, sold a bunch of devices. So you need to be very successful there. And then the question becomes, okay, who are you going to sell the data to? So people say, I'm going to sell the data to Bloomberg. So I worked, at Bloomberg for 4 years, and Bloomberg buys data, sure, but for like $10,000. So who else are you going to sell the data to, right? So I'm not saying that a data-based business model doesn't make sense, but I think that's a lot of figuring out to be done at the startup level.
Great. Anything else? Yeah.
I think I've already added myself on this sort of data intensive, improves the process that's tied to a meaningful pot of cash with limited number of stakeholders. One additional idea to that is start with an Internet of Things ecosystem that already exists. I mean, given the kind of time horizon you're looking at in terms of getting funding and growing, the mobile phone is actually an Internet of Things ecosystem that works. There's a lot of people looking at that, but find other things like that, and you're probably going to be able to make money sooner and therefore be more sustainable in an environment which, as we, I think, have described, is very much in flux and is pretty much at war anywhere from the application stage to the platform stage.
Okay, so I've got my company, I've got a business model, I understand what's happening in the market. How do I get this financed? So, Matt, I mean, this is what you do. What advice do you give to the team here in terms of raising money currently in this sector, crowdfunding? When do they come to you?
So crowdfunding, 100%. Crowdfunding is amazing. Crowdfunding is amazing, one, because it gets you the first money you need before you have a product. The vast majority of those companies on Kickstarter and Indiegogo have no clue how they're actually going to be building the product, but they have nice videos. So it gets you a bunch of like believers and backers. So that gets you that. So it gets you money. It gets you an amazing focus group, and an ability to test the market and get feedback. And 3, it enables you to validate demand, which from a VC perspective is great. I mean, it's not everything, but it's great. So crowdfunding all the way. I'm a big believer. You do need to deliver the product though. From a VC perspective, it's been so this is what you should be doing. Now, from my perspective, selfishly as an investor, the crowdfunding has been very disruptive to VCs, especially for the Series A level, because you see all those people that come in, sometimes with like $1 million, $2 million in the bank, and customers all around the world, and the terms of the conversation are just completely different. They're like, okay, well, we're a real company with real customers, and therefore the valuations have increased dramatically, and we have to pay up. But I think fundamentally, it's a great thing for entrepreneurs.
Great. Any other thoughts on financing? No. Okay. Yeah, Patrick.
One general thought. Tailor your financing strategy to your actual product and business. I know it sounds completely trite, but if you're going to go for a platform play, realize you're going to need a lot of money and find a path to get there, because you're going to be up against some very, very big people. So just something to keep in mind, because people tend to forget.
Great. Okay.
Maybe just so from a VC perspective, so you've done your crowdfunding campaign or not. I mean, I'm not saying that's exclusive, but then when you come to a VC, you need to the problem with hardware. So the expression is hardware is hard. That's very true. So the level of expectation around a hardware product when you come to a VC is higher, because if you fail, then everybody's screwed, right? There's the beauty of software is that it doesn't work. You upgrade overnight and you're done. With hardware, if it doesn't work, then you go back to Shenzhen for 2 months, and that's very hard. So the bar is higher. And the type of thing that we look for as VCs are people that have a true mastery of the entire supply chain and manufacturing process and really understand how that works. Have the team that enables them to do that. And so we see a bunch of people building Internet of Things companies that come from a software background. And that's entirely fine. But we want to see people with true hardware experience. And the people with hardware experience are not 25 out of Wharton. They are typically in their 50s. They've been doing this for a long time. It's almost impossible. Well, don't want to generalize, but it's hard to find an experienced hardware person in their 30s. There's been a whole generation of hardware specialists that never happened because people stopped investing in hardware in the 90s and early 2000s. So the only people who truly develop a hardware experience are the people that worked at Apple, essentially, and a handful of companies. But there's nobody else, right? So what you need on your team is the 50-year-old guy or gal who has been screaming at manufacturers because the product is delayed for the last 30 years, and that's hard to find, but that's important.
I love how this has turned. I mean, I really do. Because like 5 years ago, basically, you couldn't walk through a door if you weren't 23 and a mobile app guy. And no offense to 23-year-old mobile app guys, but it's a very specific thing. And it's now come all the way around to where we're back to talking about what kind of value we can bring, what kind of company it is. And just one point off of what Patrick was saying, I would caution, having been through this, it's the Wild West out there, and it's still, we're all pioneers trying to get ahead. Be careful how much money you bring on, because it's actually just as much a problem as bringing on not enough. And you startup people who have some experience actually, I'm sure, understand exactly what I'm saying, because what you bring on, I mean, it's your little sailboat and you're going to catch the wind or you're going to tack here and there. You bring on too much money, you're going to bring on, problems often. So figure out how much you need, solve your problems, hone your product. It is way more important than thinking you can solve all of everything by bringing on more money. You don't solve everything with more money. You solve everything by figuring it out, getting data, getting actual feedback, going back to your customers, figuring out what it was that they hated, they liked. Don't be afraid of that, because if you are, it won't work. It really won't work.
Good thoughts. Great. Okay. A couple of questions, and then yes.
Yeah, assuming that, and I agree with you, that emerging markets are where a lot of the innovation occurs. Assuming that the market is bigger out there, growing faster out there, how do you convince a VC who's based in New York to invest in a project that's overseas?
Global projects,
bribes, first-class trips. No, it's a truly important question. So VC is not a scalable model. So in our firm, we have 4 partners. I invest in New York, San Francisco. I look a lot at Europe, Berlin, Paris, London. The effort to go to Singapore, and I would be the person that needs to do it, is just immense. So one way of doing it, and a lot of European and Israeli companies have been doing this for the longest time, is to just headquarter in New York, which I realize is not an entirely satisfactory answer. But if you want to get US VCs having a strong presence and ideally headquarters in the US, and then a tech team, development team, or marketing team even in wherever the original country is, helps.
But with respect, even if we're based in New York and the project is overseas, wouldn't that still be a harder draw for VCs to invest in?
Well, if you are exclusively working, internationally in one specific country, then the question becomes, do you really want a US VC? I mean, what other than money, what does a US VC bring to the table? So, typically bringing a US VC makes sense if you either want to have a US strategy or an international strategy with a strong US component.
I would add one of the things about IoT, one of the nice things is the partnerships that we are all talking about. And I think, without knowing what your business is, go find that global company that has their own fund who will help you before you get to the VC. And for us, whether it's Cisco who we're partnered with or Google who we're partnered with, you can find, and not that they're the only two, but you can find a path, right, through partners who do have a vested interest, or they will try and help you there, and then go get the money. I think, because then you'll have the product, and you'll have it all nailed, and you'll get the valuation you may want, but also you'll grow the company, which is really the ultimate goal, more than just getting the VC money. I mean, you'll actually grow the company.
Okay, I think last question, and then we'll let you guys come up and meet the panel. Is there an IoT company out there, maybe that's private, that's a startup, that you admire, that you're not affiliated with, and more importantly, how can you introduce them to me? Go ahead. Anyone?
Talking to a bunch. One of the most interesting companies I've spoken to is Jasper. They used to be Jasper Wireless. They're a platform for putting together Internet of Things applications, and they have a development. They have an SDK, but they also have integrated with about 100 telco carriers worldwide. So if you're a global corporation, you can have a solution that can work across lots of different carriers, because they've cracked that. So that's an interesting company that's popped up on my radar recently.
Any others? Yes.
Yeah, in the advertising space, there's a bit of problem with mobile advertising, which is that the inventory you get is not really that great. It's really small, and it's not really giving you much value. And there's a company And so one of the answers is to actually create an experience within an app. The problem is most of the time that app is dormant. And there's a little company called Urban Airship. First of all, I love the name. That basically wakes up your app based on a specific trigger. And we've actually integrated Urban Airship in the iHeartRadio app, which is with our sister company, Clear Channel Media and Entertainment, to enable truly value-adding advertising experiences within the mobile app. And I've always thought that was just a clever little idea.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Great. I think I wanted to thank the panel. This was a terrific discussion.